Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anna Inario, and I am part of the team that puts on the PARC Forums here at PARC. Before we begin and have Jacob Morgan come on stage, I wanted to let you know that we do have another few PARC Forums that are scheduled already for the next coming week. So in 2 weeks' time, on September 3rd, we have Frugal Innovation, and we have a group of panelists, Mark Hatch, CEO of Tech Shop, Bruce Borden, CEO of G-Thrive, Michelle Kittereff from B-Bound, and Professor Sylvia Figueroa from the Director of Frugal Innovation Lab at Santa Clara. The moderator is Navi Raju, who's a Cambridge Business School fellow. And they'll be talking about how frugal innovation started. And so they'll have that panelist on September 3rd. The next one that we also scheduled is at the end of September, and this should be also a very good one. It's with Wade Crowfoot, and he'll be talking about climate change in California, policy and technology innovation advancement to stem a global crisis. He serves as the Deputy Cabinet Secretary and Senior Advisor to Governor Brown. Again, that one's on September 30th. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jacob Morgan, and he's a good friend of PARC. We've known him for a while now. He's come to PARC and talked with our researchers, talked with our CEO. He has a book, Future of Work. You're welcome to purchase it on Amazon. He's also the co-founder of Future of Work Community, which is a brand council of the world's most forward-thinking organizations. He also contributes to several different publications such as Forbes, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today. And he also hosts a popular Future of Work podcast as well. So we are so happy and pleased to have him here with us tonight. So without further ado, Jacob Morgan.
Good afternoon. So I don't know if this thing is even on. Is it? Well, can you guys hear me okay, even if I just yell? Okay, great. So I'm really excited to come speak with you guys today about a topic that I am extremely passionate about, and that is, of course, the future of work. I think we live in a very, very exciting time for business, probably the most exciting time in business that we've ever seen in the past. And today I want to talk about why that's the case. Why are things changing? Why are things so exciting? Why are organizations investing in things like the employee experience? Why are all these conversations around management and leadership and engagement and happiness? Why is all of this stuff happening? And why are our organizations thinking differently about what it means to work? Now, I spend a lot of my time exploring this very, very question. And so I run something called the Future of Work Community. And the Future of Work Community is a collection of some of the world's largest companies, and I'll show you who some of those are in a second. And what I spend a lot of my time doing is researching, writing, exploring, and giving talks like this at organizations around the world. Now, those of you that are interested in the topic, the orange book there on the right is the most recent one that came out called The Future of Work. And it breaks down a lot of these concepts that I'm going to share with you today. Now, the Future of Work Community, like I said, is a group of, I think we have 55 companies now from around the world. And you can see who some of these organizations are. And these are chief human resource officer, these are VPs of HR, they run innovation programs, collaboration programs, technology programs. And so we created this really cool digital community where all of these executives and leaders at these companies come and share ideas and thoughts and what they're working on and what their challenges are. And I host 2 events for all these organizations every year. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is actually what these organizations have shared with me. So it's not ideas or theories or just things that I'm making up. It's what I'm actually seeing these organizations doing and what they're starting to actually invest in. Now, I'm very interested in the future of work. So you heard that I have a podcast on the topic. I interview a lot of executives on that topic. And come September, I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm launching a show called the Future of Work Show, where basically what happens is I go inside of 10 organizations, 10 forward-thinking companies. I interview their executives, I tour their offices, and I speak with their employees to find out what they think about the future of work. I like to describe it as a little bit like comedians in cars getting coffee, but with a little bit of a business twist to it. And PARC is actually one of the organizations that is going to be featured in that. So I wanted to show you a trailer of what that's like, just so you can get a sense of what I'm trying to do and where my mind is going when I think about these themes around the future of work. It's a very short 30-second clip, but it'll give you some perspective. Oh, no audio? We'll try it again. No. Let me try one.
The world of work is changing. But why is it changing? How is it changing? And what should you and your organization do about it? Hi, my name is Jacob Morgan. I'm a best-selling author, speaker, and futurist, and on this show, I'm going to help answer all of these questions. Join me as I go inside some of the world's most forward-thinking companies to tour their offices and interview their executives and employees. Welcome to the future of work.
So I learned an enormous amount from going inside these companies and actually speaking with these organizations, because a lot of what we hear about when it comes to the future of work tends to come from vendors or consultants or authors or from other people. And so, again, some of what I'm going to share with you is actually coming from these organizations, and I really wanted to give these companies a voice, which is why I wanted to do this, this project, which again is a little bit different. So that brings us to the ultimate question of why are we here? Why are we talking about the future of work? Why are these concepts so interesting? Why do people care about this? And I think there are three things that are driving this conversation around why we're actually here. The first is that we're living in a very connected world. In fact, the world has never been more connected. In the direction that we're going towards, with the Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything, more mobility, it's going to be even more connected. So that's the first reason. The second reason why we're here is the pace of change. The pace of change has never been faster than it is now. And the third and final reason is that we're seeing massive disruption. So if you put these three things together, connectivity, massive disruption, the pace of change, you see that we're living in a world where things are starting to become very, very dynamic. We live here in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. We see this all the time, right? I mean, virtually every industry, every company, regardless of how small, medium, or large, is being disrupted. Transportation companies, healthcare companies, financial institutions, you name it, every organization in every industry is somehow being impacted and disrupted. And of course, the folks at PARC spend a lot of time exploring that, so it makes sense that you guys are all here. So where does this bring us? What do you think about when you think of the future of work? Now, I'm actually curious to hear what you guys think. So if you want to shout out any words or phrases or concepts or ideas that come to mind, curious to hear what you think. Future of work, what pops to mind? Robots. Yes?
Productivity.
Productivity. Ooh. Somebody was agreeing with him back there. Yes?
Wherever, whenever you want.
Wherever and whenever you want.
Massive unemployment.
Massive unemployment. Uh-oh. Yes?
Work-life balance.
Work-life balance. I see some very different. Massive unemployment, work-life balance. I see some different. Yes?
Those aren't new. Co-creation.
It's true. Co-creation. Interesting. Yes?
Burnout.
What was it?
Burnout.
Burnout. Wow. Burnout and work-life balance. You guys should get
Empowerment.
empowerment. I like that one. And so the interesting thing is that you guys are all right. Right? I mean, the future of work is a massive topic. It's a huge topic. It encompasses so many different things. And so all of these themes that you guys have touched on and have mentioned are themes that are being widely explored. I mean, every business publication, every media and news outlet is talking about all of these things. Is there going to be massive unemployment? Does work-life balance exist? Are we going to be more productive in the future? Are robots and automation, is that going to take away jobs? Right? These are all interesting and fascinating themes around the future of work. So I was really curious to hear where you guys were when you think about that concept. Now, to give you some context around why the workplace is changing, we have to look a little bit about what it's like to work in our current organizations. And one of the fascinating things that we're starting to see is that organizations are rethinking management models, organizational structures, what it means to be an employee, what it means to actually work, right? All these interesting conversations are starting to happen within our organizations. And it's about time, because when we think about what it used to be like to work at companies, it used to be a lot like this. Now, what I'm going to show you, these are actual synonyms that you can take out of the dictionary. I'm not making these up. So the words in blue are actual synonyms from the dictionary for the word manager. If you were to look up the word manager, you will find synonyms slave driver, boss, and zookeeper. So basically what that means is that when you think of a manager, you essentially get this guy.
Hello, Peter. What's happening? We have sort of a problem here. Yeah, you apparently didn't put one of the new cover sheets on your TPS reports.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry about that. I forgot.
Yeah. You see, we're putting the cover sheets on all TPS reports now before they go out. Did you see the memo about this?
Yeah. Yeah, I have the memo right here. I just forgot. But it's not shipping out till tomorrow, so there's no problem.
Yeah. If you could just go ahead and make sure you do that from now on, that would be great. And I'll go ahead and make sure you get another copy of that memo. Okay?
Yeah, no, I have the memo. I've got it. It's right.
So when most people think of managers within organizations, that is the stereotypical manager that most people think of. I mean, these are the actual synonyms that we get from the dictionary. And sad but true, when most people see office space, they nod their heads and they smile because they know that that is what it's actually like for a lot of managers within our organizations around the world. Now, the next one that I want to show you is synonym for the word employee. Guessing that you guys already see where this is going. These are synonyms for employee. Again, the words in green: cog, servant, slave. Again, dictionary synonyms, not making this up. So basically, average employee or typical employee looks like this guy.
I told Bill that if they move my desk one more time, then I'm quitting. I'm going to quit. And I told Dom too, because they've moved my desk 4 times already this year, and I used to be over by the window and I could see the squirrels, and they were married, but then they switched from the swing line to the Boston stapler. But I kept my swing line stapler because it didn't bind up as much, and I kept the stapler.
So that is the typical, stereotypical, what an employee is supposed to look like. And then finally, the last word that I'll bring up is the word work. So what does it mean to work? What are synonyms for the word work? Daily grind, drudgery, and struggle. Now, if you put these 3 things together, you see that we are faced with a very interesting situation of what it means to work. Basically, we're all cogs working for a slave driver as we go about our daily drudgery. Now, I don't know about you, but this kind of a picture really makes work suck. Now, this isn't to say that every organization is like this, but this is the sort of the stereotypical way that a lot of people think about work. And now we're starting to challenge these assumptions. An employee is not just a cog. A manager is not a slave driver. And work doesn't have to suck. But why? Why are we starting to shift and think differently about these things? Well, the answer is there are 5 trends that are shaping the future of work. Now, these 5 trends are shaping something that I like to call the employee engagement divide. What's happening is that the workplace is starting to change at a very, very rapid pace, almost exponentially. Now, as the workplace continues to change, organizations are really, really struggling to adapt. And most organizations are not able to keep up with the pace of change. And what happens is as that gap grows between where we think our workplace should be and where our organizations actually are, our disengagement starts to increase. And so that's symbolized by that blue arrow there. So the faster organizations can adapt, the quicker they can close that gap and the lower the disengagement levels are going to be within organizations. Now, this is how organizational structures used to get done, and I'll move out of the way so you guys can see over there. Everything used to be very much top-down. In other words, the key stakeholders at the very top of the organization would set the rules, the dress code, the policies, the technologies that you can use. Everything would be set at the very top. That would then get passed down to managers, and managers will then pass all of that information down to employees. And what we're starting to see within a lot of organizations, at least the ones that I'm starting to speak with, is we're starting to see literally a complete reversal of this. Is we're starting to see employees bring their own preferences and ideas and ways of working and why they should be working and what they value. They're bringing that to their managers, and managers are bringing that to the key stakeholders at the top of the organization, and the organization is being forced to change from the inside out. Now you'll see some of the things there, 14 principles, 10 principles, 7 principles, etc. Those are things that are outlined in the book. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of those. But if you're interested in that, that orange book on the future of work extends and expands on all of those different principles. And so it's really fascinating to see this complete 180 that we're seeing from top down to bottom up. And most of these chief human resource officers, these CEOs, these chief CXOs are all telling you that they're starting to see this within their organization. Because if they want to be able to attract and retain top talent, they need to start paying more attention to creating that employee experience and what employees actually value. And it's a very, very fascinating trend that we're starting to see more of. Now that brings us to what I've been sort of mentioning over the course of the past few minutes, and that is the 5 trends that are shaping the future of work. All the changes that we're seeing within our organizations, all these discussions that are happening around engagement and employee experience and everything is happening because of these 5 trends. And this is where I'd like to spend the bulk or the rest of my time, and then I'll open it up to Q&A, and I'd be really curious to hear what you guys actually think and if you're seeing this within your organizations. So let's start with the first trend, which is around new behaviors. And these are new behaviors largely being shaped by social media and by the web. So what do I mean by new behaviors? Well, if I were to find you on the streets, let's say 10 or 15 years ago, and come up to you and say, you know what, one day I will know everything about you, you would probably think that I am nuts. But look at the world that we live in today. We share all of our information on sites like Twitter. We put up all of our information on Facebook. We tell people where we are on Foursquare. We put up pictures on Instagram. Our professional history is on LinkedIn. I could probably Google anybody in this room and find an enormous amount of information about you. And so what that means is we are comfortable opening up and being more public and sharing and communicating and collaborating. And these behaviors are making their way into our organizations. And the common theme that these companies are saying is, well, if it's so easy for somebody to Google something or to message someone or to get access to information or to learn something by watching a YouTube video, why is it so hard for them to do that inside of our organization? And so the organization has to change and they start to think differently about these things. So that's the first trend, new behaviors. The second trend that we're starting to see is around technologies. Now, technologies are, of course, a very, very fascinating part of the future of work, especially considering that we are at PARC. Now, some of the technologies are we see a shift to the cloud, big data, the Internet of Things, wearable devices. I have a wearable device on my wrist. Anybody here wearing a wearable device? Okay. Wow. Okay, so it's pretty much a third or a half of the room. You know, if I were to ask that question a year ago, barely anybody would raise their hand. So we're already starting to see that wearables are making their way into our personal life and will be making their way into our organizations. So let's talk a couple minutes about these technologies and what they are and the impact that they are actually having. The first one that I'll touch on, and again, these are the ones that I'm referring to. The first one that I'll touch on is around big data. Now, this is a chart that was put together by IDC, and they project this is the amount of information or the type of growth that we're going to see up until through 2020. Now, just to give you some context around how big these numbers are, down here in 2011, we apparently produced 1.8 exabytes of data. Now, according to IDC and all these other companies, that is equivalent to creating the Great Wall of China out of 32 gig iPads filled with information at twice the height. Right? That's a lot of information. And that's 2011. So it just gives you some context where we're going in the next 5 years. Right? Massive amounts of data and information being produced by anything and everything. Anything that can be connected to the web will be connected to the web. And all of these things are going to produce data. Toasters, toothbrushes, cars, you name it. If it's got an on and off switch, it's going to be producing data and information. I saw somebody put an article up online where during one of the Formula One races, on average, a car puts out 1.5 gigabytes of data to a race. Right? 1.5 gigabytes of data for just doing some laps around a track. So you can imagine the amount of data that we're actually talking about. And this is something that a lot of organizations are starting to think about. Not just what do we do with the data, but how do we draw insights and information and value out of all that data that's being produced. The second thing that we're starting to see is around cloud computing. Now, cloud computing has, of course, been around for a while, but it's becoming more pervasive within organizations. And one of the big things that this means for companies is that employees get more control over the technology that they want to use. I speak with a lot of technology executives that are telling me, we give employees tools and they don't like it. So what do? They go out online, they put in their credit card information, and for $10 a month, they're using the best piece of enterprise software because they want it, not because we're giving it to them. And so employees are now able to take control over the technologies that they want and the tools that they want to use to become more productive and effective and engaged at work. And again, this is a huge challenge for a lot of organizations around the world because what do? Right? What should they be thinking about? The next one that we're seeing is around wearable devices. And for those of you that probably can't see it in the back, I'll go through what some of these are. But this is a question that was asked, how interested would you be in wearing or using a sensor or device, assuming it was from a brand you trust or offered a service that you were interested in? Now, this was done across the United States and across Europe. And you can see at the top, 42% of people in the United States would be comfortable wearing it on their wrists. And as you go around, you can see the comfort level for various things. Now, what's scary is some of these things tattooed on skin. Almost 10% of people in the United States would be comfortable having a sensor tattooed on their skin, provided it was from a brand that they respected and trusted. But look at this, right? It's amazing to see these numbers clipped onto clothing, earbuds, upper arm, around their chest. And these numbers are growing. They're growing. People are becoming much more comfortable using these devices. Now, as a little bit of a tangent, I'm sure some of you guys have heard of the recent hack, the Ashley Madison hack, right? It's been all over the web. And so this ultimately, you're a smart man. So ultimately, this brings up the question of privacy, right? What happens with privacy? Now, I'm one of those people that believes privacy is completely dead. I don't think privacy and security exists anymore. I think the only way that you can have privacy and security now is to raise a child, never give him a technology device, raise him in the forest somewhere, and that person might have some, elements of privacy. But today, I don't think much privacy or security exists. If you look at even just when you use Facebook, when you use Twitter, when you purchase something on Amazon, when you buy anything online, a lot of the terms and services that we agree to, we don't even know what we're giving up. We don't read them, we're just comfortable doing it. And a lot of us are willingly giving this information to sites like Facebook and LinkedIn. There was an interesting documentary that was done around this called Terms and Conditions Don't Apply, something like that. If you're interested, I highly recommend you check out that documentary. It's fascinating to see the amount of data that these organizations are collecting. And again, oftentimes we don't even know that it is being collected to begin with. And I think this definitely fits into that category because a lot of the data, for example, that's being collected on my wrist, it's just going into the cloud, right? I don't know, Fitbit is using it somehow, but I don't really care because I get value and utility out of the device. So it'll be very, very interesting over the next couple of years to see the impact that wearables is going to have in the workplace and on privacy and security. The next thing that we're seeing in the technology space is the Internet of Things. Now, this is by 2020, and there have been different numbers on this. Some of them have been exponentially larger than this. Some of them have been somewhat smaller. So I took a chart that I thought was kind of in between. But basically, what this means is that by 2020, it's projected that there are going to be over 50 billion with a B connected devices. Can you imagine 50 billion connected devices? Right? That is an interesting world that we're going to be living in. And this is 5 years away. And again, we're talking about anything with an on and off switch. Your coffee maker, your dishwashing machine, anything with an on and off switch will be connected to the web. And again, this is going to be very, very interesting to see. I know you mentioned productivity, sir, up in the front. And so a lot of people are hoping and thinking that the Internet of Things will improve productivity because it will be making things more efficient. So this is, again, something that a lot of organizations are trying to think about when it comes to the future of work. What does the Internet of Things mean for how work actually gets done? This is something that a company called Libelium put together. And if you Google Libelium Smart World, you'll be able to find this image high res, and you can take a look at it at your computer. But this is an example of how a city that is constructed using the Internet of Things can start to talk to each other and what that might look like. So you can see, starting from down here, the quality of shipping conditions. That information will get sent into different parts of the city, depending on parking. Parking can get adjusted, intelligent shopping, smart lighting. You have smart roads. I've already seen several of these types of campaigns on Kickstarter start to happen. So essentially, this is what some people believe is going to be the type of world that we're going to be living in, where a city is going to be able to communicate and start to talk to itself and start to help communicate and drive things and hopefully make people and things more productive. Now, this is a little bit of scary research, in my opinion, of what was done. And I know somebody was talking about unemployment and stuff like that. So this was done by, I believe it was The Economist and Business Insider. And they did a massive report, massive research project on this, which you can take a look at. I think if you Google by 2025 robots, automation, something like that, you'll find this report. It pops up at the front page of Google for pretty much every search. And basically what they did is they looked at what is the probability that your job is going to disappear. These are some of the jobs that they looked at, but they actually looked at far more jobs than just this. And you can see that if you're in the roles such as telemarketing, accounting, auditing, technical writers, retail salespeople, chances are that within the next 20 years, your job is going to be completely automated and completely done by a robot. I travel quite a bit, and I'm already starting to see this at airports. I've been at airports now where when I go to a restaurant there, I don't even see a person. Right? I sit down, I order on an iPad. I don't even know if a human's making the food back there anymore. The only time I see a person is when they bring the food out to me. Right? That's the only time I see a person. There's no interaction whatsoever. Everything is starting to be done via iPads. I've already seen restaurants that deliver food on little carousels that they've installed. Companies around the world are starting to install robot chefs. The picture down here on the bottom right, this is from Amazon's offices. A lot of people actually don't realize, but Amazon is filled with robots. It's filled with robots that bring you the products that you need. People take them out of the shelves, and then the robots go bring them back. So again, this is a huge concern for a lot of organizations. What does this mean for what the future of work is going to look like? Are robots really going to take away our jobs? There's a huge debate about this. And from what I've seen, it's split 50-50. Some people think that robots and automation, as it eliminates jobs, more new jobs will get created to replace them. And then other people believe that there's no way that we're going to be able to create as many new jobs as technology replaces. Unfortunately, I'm in that second camp where I think that there's just no way for us to create as many new jobs as technology replaces. But we will see, right? We will see. This isn't that far away. So it's very, very interesting for companies to think about this. The third trend that I want to talk about is the millennial workforce. Anybody here a millennial besides me? 2, 3, 4, we're a dying breed, guys. So a couple of us in here. Yeah, exactly. So the millennial conversation is a big one for a lot of organizations. Most companies are very concerned with this generation of worker because they believe that they have new attitudes and values and expectations and ways of working, and they're digital natives that were born using these types of technologies, right? They know how to use this, and we have to change to adapt. Now, by 2020, millennials are expected to comprise 50% of the workforce. Currently, they're already the largest workforce, but by 2020, they're going to be 50% of the entire workforce. By 2025, that number is going to be 75%, right? 75%. A lot of these people don't know what it's like to sit in a cubicle or to work, drive an hour and a half to and from work, right? They just don't have that concept. Just to share a side personal story, sometimes people ask me how I got involved in the future of work. After I graduated college, from UC Santa Cruz, I majored in economics and psychology. And I thought I was going to go work for a company for a couple of years, go back to get my MBA, and move up through the ranks of an organization. It didn't happen at all. I've been on my own for the past 8 to 10 years. And the reason for that is because of the first 2 jobs that I had. The first job that I had after I graduated college, I went to Los Angeles. And during the interview process, I was told I was going to be working on these amazing projects, these really cool things. I would meet amazing people. And I thought, this is awesome. This is perfect. This is exactly what I want. So I was willing to forego the hour-and-a-half commute to and from work each way, so 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week in a car, part-time job driving. I was willing to forget about that because I thought this was going to be a really cool and exciting opportunity. A couple months into the job, I'm doing data entry, I'm doing cold calling. And one day, the CEO comes out of his office, he hands me a $10 bill, and he says, do me a favor, go get me a cup of coffee, right? And by the way, get yourself a latte too. Like, that's what he told me. And I was like, wow, it's a good thing I went to college, right? Double majored, and yeah, I worked hard in college. And so ever since then, I became very fascinated with this concept around the future of work, right? Why is it that that happens? Why are disengagement levels so high? Is it going to be like this? You know, I started thinking about all these different types of things. And that's what I've been passionate about for the past 8 to 10 years. So again, not to go off on a little tangent, but that's how I got involved in that space. Now, what's fascinating about millennials is that this is the breakdown of what we're starting to see now. You can already see Generation Z, or Generation 2020, is starting to creep up and get into the mix. Now, some of the things that people say about millennials are true, of course, right? They're digital natives, they are used to technology, they've been born with it. A lot of them do have certain different values and attitudes and expectations. But I always tell organizations, if you were to get rid of every single millennial that you had that worked there, you would still have a lot of people that care about flexible work, doing meaningful work, having a good relationship with their boss, their manager, their coworkers, their peers. So when I think of the future employee, I don't think of it as somebody that is 22 or 32 or 52. It doesn't matter how old you are. The future employee, at least in my mind, is somebody that is able to change their behaviors and mindsets to embrace a lot of these new concepts that we're talking about. So that's one thing to think about is it's true that millennials will be the majority of the workforce. There are some differences, but let's not forget the other generations that are in the workplace as well. Now, these are some statistics that I was able to find just to give you some sort of concept around how things are changing. It costs an average of $24,000 to replace each millennial every time they leave your organization. 45% of millennials will choose workplace flexibility over pay. I actually saw another report that said on average, people are willing to give up 9% of their salary for workplace flexibility. And this was across the board. So it goes to show it's not just a millennial thing. 92% believe that businesses should be measured by more than profit. And I'm actually starting to see other generations care about this as well. I'm still waiting for some more research to come out on this, but these aren't just millennial attributes. But again, hopefully this shows the differences in opinions and values that we're starting to see. As I mentioned, it's not just about millennials. So I know I repeat that, but I always want to drive that home for organizations. The fourth big trend that we're seeing is around mobility. The best way that I can explain what we're seeing with mobility is to tell you a little bit of a story. So a couple years ago, after I graduated, well, more than a couple years ago, after I graduated college, I went to China for a month with a college buddy of mine. And we spent a month there. We traveled around all over China. We went to Beijing, Shanghai, all the major cities that you would expect. But we also went to some of the remote provinces in China. One of the provinces that we went to was in Yunnan. And we rented bikes. We biked out into the middle of nowhere. We got food and just biked out for hours. And we were just surrounded by rice paddy fields and mountains, completely in the middle of nowhere. It was a very beautiful sight. And so we're looking around, taking a little bit of a break. And I look, and not too far away, there's a rice paddy farmer in the middle of the field, going about doing his regular chores, whatever he's doing. And he stops, looks at us for a minute, goes back doing whatever he's doing, stops again, and then I'm just watching him, and he reaches into his pocket, and he takes out a smartphone, right? A smartphone. Now, we live here in the Bay Area, which many people consider to be the tech and innovation hub of the world. Here we are, thousands of miles away from the Bay Area, in the middle of nowhere, and this person has a smartphone, which means that he is able to access the same people, the same information, the same content that I am being and living here. That is what mobility is about. And if I had to explain it as kind of a theme that we're seeing, it is connect to work. To get your job done, all you need is an internet connection. You should be able to get your job done anywhere, anytime, and on any device. So that is ultimately what I think of when I think of mobility, and that's the direction I think we're starting to go towards. The fifth and final trend that I will talk about is this one of, and here are some stats on mobility that I forgot to mention. By 2017, half of employers are going to require employees to use their own devices for work. This was from Gartner. Between 2013 and 2017, mobile phone penetration is going to be almost 70% of the global population, right? So these are massive, massive numbers that we're starting to see. By 2018, 10 billion mobile and connected devices. That's more devices than there are people, right? And these are just mobile phones, mobile devices. The fifth and final trend that I'll look at is globalization. Now, when I think of globalization, I think of living in a world where boundaries of any kind do not exist. The culture that you subscribe to, the currency that you transact in, where you live, the language that you speak, all of these things are starting to matter less and less and less. We're especially starting to see this with the freelancer economy, where people can tap into top talent anywhere in the world. In fact, the person that made this presentation, I've never met. He makes all my presentations. He makes all of my design work, all of my logos, right? And he does amazing work, better than I was able to find even looking here in the United States. So that gives me an opportunity to tap into top talent regardless of where it might be anywhere in the world. And that's something fascinating that we're starting to see. So globalization is this idea that living in a world of any kind of boundaries do not exist. The world itself is just becoming like a big city. So what does that ultimately mean? Well, it means a couple things. Global talent pool, right? There's talent anywhere in the world. We have to recognize that the smartest people don't necessarily have to be within a 5-mile radius of us. And resources and people are moving across the world, right? And again, the analogy I like to use is the world is becoming like a giant city. So what do we do? What do we do about all of this? Right? What do we do about these 5 trends that are shaping the future of work? How do organizations keep up? What should they be thinking about? Now, I go into much more detail in the book, but I will give you sort of the summary of what I think a lot of organizations are starting to do. And that summary is very simple. Create laboratories, not factories. So what do I mean by that? A lot of organizations were built on this mentality that organizations are pretty much like an assembly line. You show up, you do what you're told, you don't ask any questions, you don't cause any problems, you wear what we tell you to wear, you use the devices we tell you to wear, or we use the devices we tell you to use, and that's it, right? That's what it used to be like to work. It was a factory. I like to call it a disengagement factory, right? People would be enthusiastic, they'd be happy, they'd go into these organizations, and then they come out depressed and sad and unmotivated. At least most people do. So instead of creating these types of factories where information flows from the top down, where you have silos, where everybody just does what they're told, we have to create laboratories. And of course, PARC would know this better than anybody. In laboratories, that's where you start to see innovation. So creating a laboratory means listening to what your employees care about, paying attention to what they value, running experiments and running tests and seeing what sort of ideas you can get. I'll give you an example. Atlassian is a company that's based in the Bay Area. It started off in Sydney. And they wanted to figure out, do people use their desks? And so they put sensors on everybody's desk to find out if people even sit there. And they find out that when most people work, they don't work at their desks. They go sit in random places, they're at meetings, they move around. They don't use their desks. And so they changed their office style to be more open. They removed this idea of having dedicated desks. Right? That's what I mean when I say create an experiment. Whirlpool, another great organization. They got rid of management titles, and they created 4 types of leadership categories for everybody. And they said, everybody here's a leader. These are the 4 types of leaders that we have. Leader of self, leader of function, leader of executive team, and I forgot what the 4th one was. Adobe, another great example. They recently abolished their annual employee reviews to see what would happen. Mars Drinks invested $30 million into a new facility where they wanted to create beautiful employee experiences for people to show up to work. Pandora, the music company, they have a program where if 3 or 5 employees care about something, they can petition to get funding for it, regardless of what it is. Wine club, racquetball, chess, whatever it is. If you have a group of people that care about something, the company will pay for you to do something with it. One of the other cool things that Adobe did is they created an innovation program called Kickstart. And basically what that program was is they would give any employee that wanted to participate $1,000 prepaid credit card. You don't have to show receipts. You don't have to do anything with it. They'll take you through a 2-day innovation workshop, and you use that $1,000 to create a prototype of whatever it is your idea is. Once you create that prototype, you present it to an executive. If you can just get one executive at the company to say that they like your idea, you get funding for it to do something else with it. Right? That's what I mean when I say creating a laboratory. Run these experiments, run these tests. Be open to communication, open to collaboration, and run your organization less like a hierarchy and more like a flatter type of structure. I think that's the direction that we're starting to see a lot of these organizations go to. So having said that, I will just say happy experimenting. And now we can open it up to questions, and I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think. Thank you. Yes?
Do you have any thoughts on holacracy?
Yes. So I actually interviewed the guy that created Holacracy for a podcast, and he's speaking at our conference that we're hosting. It's an interesting, is everybody here familiar with Holacracy? Have you guys heard about it? A lot of people haven't heard about it. Okay. It's a, oh man, how to explain? It's a new type of organizational structure made out of circles. So those of you not familiar with Holacracy, I encourage you when you get home, just Google Holacracy. It's a lot to explain. They have meetings to process tensions. There's no bosses or managers, and it's a very interesting, different type of way to structure their company. Zappos is actually doing it, and I think to date they're the largest company to do it. Holacracy, H-O-L-A-C-R-A-C-Y. And if you just Google Zappos Holacracy, you'll see a whole thing about it. I think it is an interesting model. I think there are parts of Holacracy that organizations can implement without having to completely restructure their entire, the way work gets done. But it remains to be seen if it's going to be successful. Zappos is the largest company to do it. They're 1,500 employees. They've been doing it for 2 years, and I don't think it makes sense for large companies. I would only say that it makes sense for a smaller or maybe a mid-sized company. But a company, let's say like Xerox or PwC or Coca-Cola, where they have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees, there's no way a structure like that would ever work. I mean, if it's taking Zappos years to roll it out to 1,500 people, you can imagine what would happen if they try to roll it out to many, many thousands. But again, I think the concepts are interesting. The idea of opening up information, of sharing, of collaborating, that part from Holacracy, you can still do without having to completely reform everything within the company. So I think if you're a smaller or medium-sized company, I think it's worth to look at. If you're a larger company, I think you can still look at it and just take pieces of it that you like and try to implement those. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks for your speech. I appreciate the information here. One of the questions that comes to my mind is about mobility and globalization in terms of the workforce. I consider myself pretty lucky having worked for a multinational that made remote telecommunications equipment so we could test that about 10, 15 years ago. But there was never anything that could replace a face-to-face meeting.
Yes.
So with the millennials that are coming into the workforce, Generation Y, is it that they've seen these technologies and they don't have the same understanding of morale and engagement that we might, having been face-to-face, sitting next to people at a desk? And how do the companies that you've been working with find that balance, or where do they see it going?
Sure. So I agree. I don't think there's a replacement for face-to-face communication. I think most of the organizations are looking at technology as a way to augment and help that face-to-face communication. But still, a lot of these organizations are concerned about, what do we do with our offices? Should we have offices? Do people need to come here? And this is a big sort of a theme that I'm working on over the next couple of months, and it is around the employee experience. I think offices are not going to go away. I think we're going to see a redefinition of what an office is. Most of the companies are actually investing more money into real estate for their offices that I'm seeing to create powerful experiences for employees to actually want to show up. So if you create a beautiful environment that people want to be a part of, then they will be a part of it. And that's what I'm starting to see all these organizations do, especially here in the Bay Area. Many, many millions of dollars are being invested into beautiful spaces, trimmed, wood floors, open spaces. And that is because if you create that experience for an employee to say, wow, I want to be here, then they will be there. And it's interesting because the goal of an office was designed as a utility, right? It doesn't need to look like anything. You just need a phone to do your job. And we're starting to shift away from creating a place where people need to work there to creating a place where people want to work there. And I think that's where I call them the 3 environments of the employee experience. Digital, cultural, and physical are coming to play. And the organizations that invest in those 3 to create employee experiences are going to win. So I don't think offices are going to go away. I think face-to-face communication is very important. The big thing we'll see is more of an investment into creating beautiful spaces. I think that's where we're going.
So I can imagine that you could design an iPhone, although I gather Apple doesn't actually follow all the principles you're talking about, using some of these ideas. Can you make 20 million of them in a year using these ideas? Reliably, dependably?
20 million iPhones?
Yeah. I mean, can those kind of organizations also adopt these? Do we still need some factories, in other words?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's, of course, no doubt that there are some organizations like Apple. And unfortunately, it's hard to say because nobody knows the inner workings of Apple. I don't know their management structure. Their management structure has never been publicly talked about. Last I heard, they were trying to become more open and collaborative and to foster that type of dialogue. But I have no idea how they operate. I don't know if everybody in Apple is just given orders and they have to do what they're told, or if there's any type of a feedback and dialogue process. Nothing has ever been said about Apple, so I wish I knew. But I can tell you that other organizations that make many, many millions of products and spend billions of dollars on things, GE, all these organizations are investing in these types of structures to be able to do that. Apple is one of those anomalies. I wish I knew more about how they operate. Unfortunately, I just don't. Yeah, and there are a lot of companies like Foxconn. Toyota is a very good example for, they do similar stuff. Toyota's actually done a very, very interesting job of empowering people on the assembly line. What Toyota does, and again, everybody knows Toyota. On the assembly line, they actually they have something called the Employee Idea Suggestion Box, where any employee within the company that works on the assembly line or elsewhere can contribute an idea to the company. Any employee on the assembly line also has the opportunity to stop the entire assembly line if they see something that they want to fix or if they see something that isn't working properly. So I think that's the best example I can think of as a manufacturing company that is starting to empower employees to contribute ideas and to actually take charge when they see things and need to fix things. Foxconn's one of those, a lot of ethical debates around what they're doing. I hope that we will start to see organizations like that start to fade away. I hope. But, right now there are still, unfortunately, a lot of them out there.
Here's my new question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, what was your old question?
What's that?
You gotta give it. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Well, you indicated you were a millennial. If I can, I'm having some data problems, so it's not a little slurry here. I would like to get your opinion on what I think is going to be a massive digital collision, and that's with respect to the Internet of Things, and wondering what your impression might be when all this digital stuff coming from the Internet of Things hits the limited amount of cognitive space that we all have, that requiring all of the passwords and all the other symptoms and material and processes and so forth, do you think that's going to stand up or something else is going to happen? I personally think this will be a great neurological tragedy that will go on of some sort, but I'm not really sure. And as a newcomer, so to speak, to the future, what's your opinion?
That's a great question. And Steve, the CEO of PARC, is here. He might actually have some interesting insights on this too. So the question is basically, is the Internet of Things going to make our heads explode? And that is a good question. And what happens with the Internet of Things, obviously we're going to see a lot of data that's created. Now, the challenge is that the data is oftentimes public, but the tools needed to analyze and make sense of that data are not. Right? The tools that we need to actually make sense of these massive amounts of information and data are things that only large organizations typically possess. So in other words, you can access the data, you can take a look at it, but as an individual person, we don't have the tools or resources or knowledge to make any sense of that type of data. And you're right, passwords and all that sort of stuff is going to be a little bit of an issue. Some companies are doing things with biometric stuff where, we already see, like on my phone, to unlock it, you put your finger on it, it starts to unlock. I definitely think we'll start to see more of that. A lot of people actually think the Internet of Things is going to make us more productive because these devices are just going to talk to each other. So for example, when you wake up in the morning and your alarm clock goes off, your alarm clock is going to tell your coffee maker to start brewing coffee. Your coffee maker is going to alert your car that's downstairs that in 30 minutes you need to be picked up out front. So your self-driving car is going to pull around. You'll get in. The self-driving car will notify your 10 o'clock meeting that you're running a couple minutes late because you're in traffic. And so you just basically sit there and these devices kind of coordinate and run a lot of these things that you used to have to take control of. Same thing for groceries. If your refrigerator is low on groceries, your refrigerator is going to automatically order it. You're going to have a little drone drop it off, or a Uber car, or somebody's going to bring it to you. If you have issues with health, the wearable device that you're wearing, it'll automatically notify a doctor. You'll get a notification. So you can see where we're going with this. As far as passwords and what's going to happen with cognition, that's a good question. I think that we're going to see a lot of smart assistants enter our organizations, things like IBM Watson. You guys have heard of IBM Watson? So IBM Watson is basically like, if you think of Skynet from the Terminator, they basically built it. And so we're going to see a lot of these different types of things where these neural networks are created, where we have these artificial types of things that are being created. Watson is already able to diagnose things better than doctors. It's already able to do the jobs of many lawyers by scanning through legal documents. And I think in the future, Watson is going to be an assistant that we use in our personal lives. Think of a much more advanced version of Siri or Cortana that you can actually talk to. There's a show on TV called Humans. Has anybody heard of the show called Humans? Watch that show. That's where we're going. Right? That is where we're going. Steve, I'm really actually curious to hear what you think, being the CEO of PARC.
I think that there are remaining, technical challenges that Josh mentioned, that innovation is going to solve, which is kind of the picture that you have. I wouldn't believe all of IBM's marketing about what Watson's already doing, but I do think that the scenario that you described is fairly accurate, where it's going to be agents talking to other agents and processing that information, and there'll be innovation solutions to help you search that information and find it. I mean, you could have, there was in 1980s, right? If you predicted for the amount of digital storage information in the world, people would say, well, how am I going to find all of that? And then Sergey and Larry find out a way to do hyperlink search, and now the human memory is larger than all of our brains put together. In fact, it's all out there, and we can find it and make sense of it. Not perfectly, but there are solutions to manage the cognitive load, of people that the systems have to evolve. So there's clearly innovation required, but that's what we do here, in the valley and in particular. So I don't think that's the barrier. Again, having said that, there's clearly innovation required.
So our heads won't explode, hopefully. But that's a very interesting question.
So I see I see a lot of these methods actually coming in from people that are working in startups, and they've got, they have experience in lean and agile methods, and, so in smaller organizations, they have the experience with a lot of these ideas. And then when their company gets acquired by a larger company, then maybe some of those ideas go into the larger company. It seems, how do you see that it happens that, a large company, essentially makes a top-down mandate that there's going to be a bottom-up structure, right? I mean, because right now what happens is that it develops very locally, and then people seem to adapt that, oh yeah, this is actually a better way to work. And how do you see that scales?
So a lot of the organizations, and I mentioned some of them that are part of the community, and some of them are quite large, these organizations. They have many, many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees. And a lot of it is actually coming from these senior executives that are seeing what's happening, and they are making huge steps and initiatives to make their organizations more collaborative and more transparent and more open. I mean, we look at companies like IBM, you look at companies like PwC, GE is a great example that's trying to teach lean to all of their many, many tens of thousands of employees. So it's definitely something that is now starting to come from both sides. It's definitely being brought in from the bottom up. I think the top is starting to see it and say, let's latch onto that and make that happen throughout the whole company. But I think what's more interesting is that companies are realizing that they have to do this, right? Because how are you going to attract and retain top talent if you don't have this type of a structure, right? Who's going to want to work at a company where you are stuck in a hierarchy, where you commute 9 to 5, where you can't use the devices that you want, where your ideas aren't heard and valued, where you have no connection or relationship with the company? Who's going to want to work there? Right? There are some organizations that say, oh yeah, no, we're doing fine. We got billions of dollars in assets and resources. A lot of companies say that, and I think those companies are going to be the first to disappear. HP is on the brink of who knows what now, and they were, considered this behemoth that nobody's ever going to take down, splitting up into 2 companies. I mean, it's a mess there. So I think that we're definitely going to start to see a lot of interesting change happen within these big companies. I think these big companies are going to start to have to become smaller companies, like what Google did with Alphabet. Everybody familiar with that? So they created the parent company called Alphabet, and basically Google is now one company, a part of Alphabet. And they split up Google essentially into multiple parts. Everyone is being run independently. And I think we're going to see much more of that start to happen because that's going to drive innovation within organizations. But yeah, I think it's coming from the top down and from the bottom up and from the middle. I think it's coming everywhere.
In your work with these companies, have they identified certain skills that they need our schools to be teaching more or less of? Like if we're all leaders, then people need leadership skills. People need to be more innovative. People need, it seems like today, self-promotion through blogging and tweeting is more necessary. So is there a list of skills that schools need to do more or less of? And have you been working with any schools for the school of the future?
That's great. I wish I was working with schools. I've interviewed a lot of these, like Skillshare and Udemy, Skillsoft. Like I've spoken with a lot of these companies that create these online courses. The big challenge with a lot of these educational institutions is that by the time they graduate people, the skills that they'll learn to become obsolete and outdated. When I graduated college, there was no future of work discussion that I was aware of. I had to kind of find it and learn about things myself. I've never used anything that I've learned in economics or psychology. None of the calculus that I've taken, none of the statistics that I've learned, none of the child behavior things I've ever used in my life. But I needed that diploma to graduate. What companies are telling me is the biggest thing that they value from employees is the ability to learn. So what you know is less relevant than your ability to be able to learn and to apply new things that you learn. I think that's something that a lot of our schools don't do a very good job of teaching. We teach knowledge, we teach you to retain things, we teach you history, we teach you things that you need to retain, but we don't teach you where to go to learn these things yourself, right? How do you go teach yourself if you want to learn something? I mean, I know people that are repaving their entire driveways watching YouTube videos, taking their computers apart watching YouTube videos. So where do you go to learn these things? How do you stay up to date to become relevant so that you don't become obsolete? I think that's what we need to start teaching more in schools. Hopefully that answers your question.
What's your initial reaction to both the story and then the discussion around the story, the New York Times, Amazon
Knew that was
article?
coming. So I did a video on this so I do a video series as well, where I share my thoughts and ideas on the future of work. It's interesting, right? I mean, ultimately, I don't know how much of that stuff is accurate or true. I did my part to read as much as I could as far as comments and articles and other things that came out. And there's still a debate. I mean, some employees have commented saying, oh, it used to be like that at Amazon. It's not like that anymore. Some employees are saying, yeah, it sucks to work here. If you look on Glassdoor, their rating on Glassdoor is still like 3.5, which is pretty decent. The average employee tenure, last I heard at Amazon, is around a year, so that's not that great. I think what's far more interesting and fascinating is the fact that employees now have this voice and that we all have this voice to share and have these discussions, and how that's going to impact what organizations have to commit to doing for their employees going forward. Because you can bet that if everything in Amazon was true in that New York Times article, Amazon's going to fix it really quick, right? Really, really quick. Why would they fix it quickly? Because it's all over social, because the employees are talking about it. And so we're seeing this fascinating shift towards transparency, where if you create a place that people don't want to show up, everybody's going to know about it. So you can't afford to create an environment like Amazon supposedly has. But I don't know if that's what it's actually like to work there. I hope not. I have a lot of friends that are saying, oh, we're never going to buy on Amazon. And I'm just like, yeah, right, of course you are. It's very easy to, I'm not going to give them my money. I'm canceling my Prime membership. Yeah, you'll cancel it for a couple of weeks until you realize you need something, and you'll be right back on there, trust me. But Jeff Bezos came out and said it's not like that. A lot of other employees came out and said it's not like that. A lot of them did. So, who do you believe? It's hard to say. I know some people that work there that tell me that they like their jobs. But I hope that most of that is not true, or if it was true, it's not like that anymore. But I know as much as anybody in here. It's unfortunate. Has anybody not read that article?
You showed us a picture of the robots at Amazon. What are they?
Exactly. Yeah, those used to be humans. Humans that misbehaved became robots. It'll be very interesting to see how that story unfolds over the next coming weeks and months, and what sort of changes the company's going to have to make. Because they will eventually have to do something.
Okay, so I've got a question. Since all this development of the Internet of Things and my alarm clock talking to my coffee machine, do you think that it all will break down sometime,
Yes,
someday?
absolutely.
And what will happen then?
Absolutely, things are going to break. We can definitely expect that to break. And I know that the folks at PARC are going to try very hard to keep that from happening, because they're the ones innovating some of these cool things. But I think eventually, of course, things always break. I don't think it's reasonable for us to expect that everything's going to be perfect and things won't break down. They will, and we're going to have to learn from them, just like we've learned from other things when things break down. And hopefully when things do break, they won't be that bad. I mean, there's already incidents happening. Where was it? In Germany, where there was already this big article written that a robot killed a human. Has everybody read that in like the manufacturing facility? So we're already starting to see this backlash, and there's something called the uncanny valley, which is, I think it was a Japanese scientist that created it, where he said the more robots start to appear like humans, the more we're going to start to distrust and not like them, pretty much. And so there's this theory that eventually there's going to be this kind of massive backlash against robots and automation, and we're just going to like be beating them in the streets like an iRobot. Who knows? That very well might happen. We don't know. I think we'll definitely approach a world where things will break down, but I think that's why these organizations are investing so much money. The Internet of Things is already being used. The jet engines, every time you go into a jet, those jet engines are already communicating to other parts of the aircraft and to people down below, self-diagnosing themselves and figuring out, is there a problem with the engine? What needs to be fixed when we land? Like, this stuff is already happening. So I think that's a good question. Steve, are you going to keep things from going into chaos?
Things. So a couple things, right? It used to be that everybody fed themselves. 60% of the people worked on growing food, right? And now it's, at best 2%. And there's problems, right? There's a drought in this area. This crop doesn't come in. So there will absolutely be problems, but the fact that there'll be failures doesn't mean that those, systems don't take over and work. And so one of the things is I think more and more a opportunity for where we need some better science is in the design of resilient systems. So how do you make sure that those failures don't propagate? So one of the dangers in food is, there's like two types of corn, that we grow in the United States. And if there was a disease that killed them all, half of the corn's gone. So people working on different strains, so resilient systems design will be more and more a critical skill. But this idea that we're kind of, this is all of a sudden we're going to be susceptible to these failures and that's new, that left 150 years ago. Who in this room could grow their own food, right, where you live and how you live? Who in this room could generate your own electricity, and power, right? That transition occurred 150 years ago. So it will continue. We need to get better at it and develop, resilient systems design and technologies. But my answer is that ship, that ship sailed about 6 billion people ago.
Worst
in the
case
world.
scenario, it'll be like The Walking Dead, and we'll all just be running around with shotguns, trying to avoid being eaten.
Great. We'll take one last question. I know this gentleman was waiting for a long time, and then afterwards we'll open it up to our reception outside for more questions and networking.
Thank you. So a second question. One scary trend that's maybe more scary than heads exploding from too much information is somebody deliberately exploding things because there's no privacy. And so cyber attacks, some of you probably read the article about being able to drive somebody's car off the road by hacking into the computers in the car. People worry about cyber attacks that would bring down infrastructure like the power grid or the water treatment system or things like this. And so the more we get to Internet of Things, unless we can somehow get a better grip on privacy and resiliency, this is actually a scary trend, I think.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, I don't think there's such thing as privacy anymore. A lot of, at least the CIOs and CTOs that I talk to, are acknowledging that there's no way for them to lock down their entire organization. So what they do is they focus all their efforts on security, on the core areas of the company. They put security across other areas, but their attention is focused on just those core areas. But things are getting leaked and hacked left and right. Ashley Madison was the big company where I think 36 million usernames and passwords were hacked. We're starting to see this more and more. Self-driving, or the Jeep that you're mentioning, that was hacked. So it's a tough choice for a lot of CIOs and CTOs, right? What do they do? And at least from what they're telling me is they're saying, look, we acknowledge that we can't keep everything safe and everything secure, so we'll do our best to lock things down, but our attention, our focus is on those absolute core things that can't get out of the company. That's where we build the fortress around it. Everything else, if it gets out, it's unfortunate, but we acknowledge that it will get out. And it's a very different shift in mindset to 5-10 years ago, where it's like the whole company must be locked down. You use only the devices we give you. You can only work here at work. And now look at where we are. I mean, people are downloading apps. They're using whatever they want. And so these executives are acknowledging there's just no way to stop that kind of stuff from happening. But I think, cyber warfare and cyber, that's a huge concern that a lot of people are talking about. Skynet, pretty much. At the end of the world. I like sci-fi movies, if you guys haven't been able to tell. So, but as Steve mentioned, there are a lot of smart people all over the world that are working on keeping that from happening and creating fail-safes and securities and innovating and creating new ways to make sure that those things don't get out. I think it's one of those, let's wait and see what happens. But it is scary. I agree.
So on behalf of PARC, thank you for coming for today's PARC Forum, and especially to Jacob Morgan for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.